Hey, what is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. That time of week again, everybody's favorite segment on YouTube, the MLB Power Rankings. The trade deadline passed this week just a couple of days ago, so I'll probably talk about a bit about that while we go through all 30 teams. It's going to be the usual going over the past week, talking about why some teams are moving up, why some teams are moving down. Bottom rows pretty much staying the same now at this point in the season, only 2 months left. And those teams are pretty far out of it. The second bottom row is starting to be teams that are out of it, well, technically, mathematically in it. And they're the ones I'm leaning, obviously, more not really going to make it. Middling row, they're either fighting their way to a playoff race or falling their way out. Second row, those teams that are wild card, maybe some division leaders, not quite top tier teams. And then, of course, the top six we'll get to at the end. Before I do jump into it, guys, we're going to go through all 30 teams. It's going to be pretty quick, I think, today. But just subscribe if you are new to this channel. I am looking to try to get to that 1,700 mark. We have been working our way there. I thought we'd get there a little bit faster, but I am going to be doing that hat giveaway when we do it. So if you are new, make sure you do that. But number 30, we're going to jump right into it now. This team is I'm just going to pretty much leave them there, I think, the rest of the season. They just crossed over the 30 wins. I think today was or I guess it would have been yesterday because they lost today. But it's like the third week in a row where the Colorado Rockies have won a series. So you got to give them a little bit of credit. The Friday game, 17-16, come from behind win after being down 9-0 after the top of the first inning to the Pirates. Just absolutely crazy series. Every game at Coors is absolutely crazy. So only 30 wins, though, this season. There are arguments that maybe some of these other teams are worse than the Rockies at this point, but the fact that they still are on trajectory to maybe have the worst run differential of all time, I'm probably going to keep them there. But number 29, making an argument, maybe. They've been having a pretty ugly season. About April, May, I thought Washington was taking some strides forward. They have these young players stepping forward, some pitchers that were having great seasons, and they were putting up fights against most teams. But then we have a week like this week where they're playing two top 10 teams and they go 1-5, getting swept over the weekend, pretty much getting absolutely obliterated by the Brewers. 0-6, I think, against the Brewers this season so far, and I think that wraps up the season series between those two. And then 1-2 against Houston. Washington's far out, and I think the biggest hurtful blow for them is that the team that they had been competing with at the bottom, Miami Marlins, are one of the hottest teams in the MLB right now. Number 28, team that has been finding wins here and there and actually won both series this week against two teams that were pretty decent. With the LA Angels, they won that series today. I almost got the sweep before blowing it in the bottom of the ninth today. And then they beat the Philadelphia Phillies earlier in the week. The White Sox, I think, are a lot better than a lot of people give them credit for. They seem to manage to pick up some wins here and there. But they're far from really getting back into the conversation even next year or the years forward. It's going to be a tough rebuild situation for them. They didn't really have a lot of assets to sell at this trade deadline, unlike some other teams. So there's not going to be a whole lot of improvement going forward for the White Sox. Next up, number 27. Team that is all too familiar in this bottom row year after year. They were one of the bigger sellers at the trade deadline, shipping out quite a bit of their relievers with Bednar going out and other guys, right? But the Pirates win a series against the Colorado Rockies. They lost the series to the Colorado Rockies, but they did find an interesting sweep at the beginning of the week against the San Francisco Giants. And with the Pirates, it's like sometimes we see flashes of brilliance from this team. Of course, with Paul Skeens on there, we're going to see that brilliance a lot more often. They lose the game in Colorado with Paul Skeens, interestingly enough. But at times this season, it's just super strange. We see the Pirates coming in and sweep teams, and then they have these terrible losing streaks. It's just like one of the most inconsistently team in the league. But the one thing you can count on the Pirates that they're going to be in this bottom row at number 26. One of the biggest sellers at the trade deadline, just shipping everyone out. A lot of speculation around what's going on there. Correa going out to Houston, some relievers going out, Ty France going out. Like, these guys were clear sellers, and the speculation being a lot that the owners were just trying to unload payroll to make the team more viable for sale. I think Minnesota fans would be excited that this team gets sold because the ownership has been an issue for them for a long time, but the Twins have kind of cemented themselves into this bottom row at this point. Being sellers, have a pretty rough go as of the past month. There was some brilliance earlier in the season. We saw one of the longer win streaks of the year coming out of there, but they fell pretty quickly. Number 25, another team that kind of had a fall this year. This week was interesting. We saw some flashes of what the Orioles are capable of. They had a 4-game set against the Blue Jays where they played 4 games within 48-hour span. They won 3 out of the 4 of those games, and they really poured on the runs, and that's kind of what we had expected this team to be more like coming into the season. They've really struggled with lefties for the most part, but we saw the offense really pick up earlier in the week, and then they go in and they lose the series to the Cubs. Had a chance to maybe even win the series today before a 9th inning loss here in the rubber match today. But they put up a fight, so we saw some signs of what we probably thought the Orioles were going to be like more of the season. The big thing here is they have so many teams to hop. They're not going to get back in the playoff race. So the worst team, arguably maybe not, in the American League East. So they do have a way to go up. I think this is by far going to be the lowest they're going to be the rest of the season. I wouldn't be surprised for them to start moving their way up and getting back in the conversation. Next up, keeping them out of the bottom row. They were one of those teams that have been in the bottom row, much like the Pirates, for a lot of the history of this. But another 500 week for them. 2-1 against Seattle, starting the week off against a team that is fighting to get back in the division lead. And then they fall in an interesting series. They really took the lead on Friday night against Arizona. And then the last 2 games, they just fell behind Saturday and Sunday against Arizona and just could not get back into it. Just giving up runs. I think the big part with this Athletics team, obviously we saw some big sells coming out of their team at the trade deadline, especially in their bullpen, which I think is going to catch up to them. We have saw in the past, and I talked about it in other videos, how the Athletics have been one of those teams that the bullpen can't really hold teams back, and we're seeing a little bit more of that now, of course, now that they've sold their best bullpen arms. Number 23, getting back to probably where we thought they would be at the beginning of the season. At least for me, this is kind of the area I thought they would be. They fought their way up. But I think it was too good to be true. 1-3 against the Yankees, 1-2 against the Dodgers. So we're looking at 2 teams that were the World Series last year, and they just go 2-5, which I guess picking up 2 wins is pretty interesting. They got shut out in both losses to the Dodgers while shutting them out in the 1 win. The series with the Yankees is just, they're another one of those teams that were just selling a little bit of their pitching, and that's bringing in other pitching that's probably more a little bit long term. They didn't really buy, then it's kind of going to be a team like we're used to. Tampa is going to have to find that way to rebuild. Being in this American League East, we have the powerhouse Jays now, Yankees and Boston all being able to spend their way, and then Tampa Bay is going to have a hard time keeping up, I think, going forward. Number 22. Highlight of these guys this week is the Speedway Classic, Speedway Classic that had a disastrous cancellation yesterday. They did make the makeup game today where they came back and won. I'm not going to get too much into that classic situation, but it seems like it did not go off as planned. A little bit of a disaster, and from some of the highlights I've seen, not really a great fan experience for a lot of people too. 2-1 against Cincinnati, so they won Friday, they won today. They had that interesting little break yesterday, and then they lost the series to Kansas City. So overall 500. Kuna Jr. was out for the majority of the week as well. He's dealing with a little bit of an injury, and it wouldn't surprise me if they kind of slow him down the rest of the year just to kind of write off this year. It feels like this has been a case maybe 2 years ago. The same kind of thing happened in Atlanta. They just got into injury troubles and they kind of just wrote the season off. It feels like that's the other case for this team. Number 21. Technically, they're still 500. They're in the fight, but I just think the teams ahead of them will have a better chance of really getting in there. 1-2 against Miami, 1-2 against San Diego. Both those teams, while Miami's technically below them in the standings-wise, Miami is one of the hottest teams over the past 2 months record-wise. A team that might fight their way back into this wild card race. And then San Diego, another team that is right there in the wild card race, and St. Louis just not finding the wins there. I think they built themselves a little bit of a buffer earlier in the season when they were running hot, and it's starting to catch up. And I think at the end of the day, they didn't make any moves at the trade deadline to bolster their team while other teams in the race did. And that's just going to be the way it pans out. Number 20, another big seller at the weekend at the trade deadline. Arizona selling off a couple of their guys, I think, as well as some pitching, right? The big core guys with Suarez, Naylor going out. But they managed to still win a series this week, 2-1 against the Athletics, and then before the trade deadline, they got swept by Detroit, and it was not really that pretty. It's pretty much the story of Arizona's season, just not been a pretty season. I think number 20 is kind of where they're going to end up being the most of the year. Number 19, we have the Cleveland Guardians, and they had an interesting trade deadline in which they traded Bieber, a guy who has not pitched for them for over a year, ex-Cy Young, all-star guy. Possibly could have been the boost coming back into the rotation. He's probably going to get back in a couple of weeks from his rehab stints and stuff. But they trade him. They bring in some prospects that probably are like a year or 2 years away. So it's not really helping their team now. So they were a little bit more sellers, which interestingly, maybe not the right position. They went 2-1 against Minnesota this weekend, 2-1 earlier in the week against Colorado. So they're beating up on the bottom row teams. They're still in that playoff race. I think 3 or 4 games back in the wild card, a couple of teams ahead of them for sure. But I wouldn't sell out yet on the Guardians. I think this is where we're going to start talking about teams that are technically still in there, and we can't really decide. At the end of the day, I think the Guardians are where they are because they aren't really committing like some of these other teams. Number 18, another team that wasn't quite too active at the trade deadline, nothing that you're going to write home about. The Angels coming into this year in a position where they're doing a lot better than they thought they would have been. But at the same time, we got 3 teams in this division who are stronger than them, who have higher expectations than them, and all made bigger trade splashes at the trade deadline. So I think that is kind of going to be holding them back, and this is probably where they're going to be starting to peak. The Angels did start the week off beating one of those teams in the Texas Rangers 2-1. Then they followed it up with a losing to the White Sox. So it's one of those things where you want the Angels to find these momentums. We saw earlier in the season where they would win these series and kind of have some momentum, but to follow up a big series win against Texas, a team they are chasing in the division, to lose to the White Sox, it's just not something that playoff teams are really going to be doing. Number 17, dropping a few spots. Just like Cincinnati can't get anything going, and when you start to think that they're going to make a run at the playoffs, they start to have a week like this week. 1-2 against the Dodgers, 1-2 against Atlanta. Just not picking up series. The one bonus is they're not getting swept, and I think a lot of that credit has to go to their starting pitching. They have a little bit of the depth there that is starting to avoid those big losing streaks. And I think thanks to that has left Cincinnati in a position to be in this playoff race. But it's starting to be a little bit too late. They got 2 months, of course, to go, but they've fallen out of the division race. The only hope, I think, in my opinion, is in that wild card. Number 16, trying to stop the bleeding this week. The Giants pick up a nice rebound this weekend, I guess you could call it, after getting swept by the Pirates. There's some concern going on. They shipped out Yastrzemski as well at the trade deadline. San Francisco does find a rebound after that trade deadline, going 2-1 against the Mets. So a little bit of a seller at the trade deadline. Don't know much more than that. Maybe someone in the comments can let me know kind of how the vibe is in San Francisco. I haven't seen too much on what people are feeling coming out of that trade deadline. For me, it's just like they were in a kind of dire situation because the losing just kept piling up. Ever since that Devers trade, just feels like the team has not been there and has fallen out of what was a potential division race for them. But at the end of the day, they're right there in the thick of it in the wild card. They have the pitching. They have the talent, I think, to be able to get back in the conversation. But they have a couple of spots, and they got to start finding wins, and they got to start avoiding getting swept by teams like the Pittsburgh Pirates. Number 15, moving up a few spots. And believe it or not, a team that looked to bolster their team a little bit over the trade deadline here. They didn't do anything crazy, but they did address some needs. They brought in Yastrzemski to really address the outfield, and their outfield production was one of the lowest across the MLB. They bring in Grichuk for the same kind of thing. We already know that Kansas City has the rotation that is a competitive playoff style rotation. They showed it this weekend, beating the Blue Jays 2-1, winning in the rubber match in extras today. Big series win for them. And they started the week off beating Atlanta. So overall, 4-2 week, the kind of week Kansas City can build on. I'm interested to see. Kansas City's one of those teams that has been floating around near the bottom of this board for the majority of the past month, 2 months. They've been like in this section. But they are very much capable of being a top 12 team, and I would not be surprised to see them work their way out. Number 14. If you told me about 2 months ago that the Miami Marlins would be number 14 on this board, I would be laughing at you essentially. But they, I think, now have one of the, if not the best record in the past month across the MLB. It's one of the tops, at least over the past 2 months for sure. If they hadn't dug themselves such a hole to start the season, they would very much, in my opinion, be in a playoff spot. 2-1 against St. Louis, 3-0 over the weekend against the Yankees, and there's highlights galore about that. Arguably, I thought about even moving them up past the Yankees on this board, but I wanted to hold my horses a little bit. Let's remember, this is the first game that Miami is at 500 this season. They got to build on this. They've had some pretty epic series wins over the past month, so we got to give them a lot of credit. Number 14 might be not enough to where they should be. Maybe they should be higher. Number 13, the Rangers. After giving them credit, moving them up to the top 2 rows last week, they kind of let me down this week. Going 1-2 against the Angels, series I would have liked to see this team win if they were going to get back into this division race, and then going 1-3 against the Seattle Mariners. So overall 2-5 in their own division. And after such a bad start for the Rangers this year, they really worked hard over the past month to get back in the conversation, and to fall flat in this kind of week, not exactly what you wanted to see. The one bonus is that the other 2 teams did not have amazing weeks, other than like Seattle beat them 3 out of 4. But there was a lot of stuttering amongst the other teams, so that is working in their favor. Number 12. Felt hard. I almost had them lower at one point. I think if Texas had a better week, they would have been 14th and Miami would have been 13th kind of situation. Like, at the end of the day, it's very close. At the end of the day, I understand Miami swept the Yankees. There were some very close games. There was a bullpen explosion for the Yankees. There's some base running errors for the Yankees. It's just like every day it feels like we're seeing some just fundamental baseball breakdowns of the Yankees as of late. We've got to remember Judge has not been playing for this team while they've been struggling in the past little bit. They have a rotation. They added to their bullpen. This team is still strong. We got to still give them credit, in my opinion, at this point, to be a playoff team. It'd be shocking to see them miss, so I got to keep them at number 12. Dropping down to number 11. One of the biggest free fallers over the past couple of weeks in the top 2 rows has been the Houston Astros. It's just been a big struggle, and it really got cemented this weekend with us getting swept by Boston on the road. It just seems like the pitching has not been able to lock down even what is considered for mediocre offenses across the board. Not nothing super amazing. Like, Boston has been able to put up runs here and there, but they just got piled on, it felt like, and after having leads, they give up leads. It just was one of those weeks for Houston. They started the week as well, beating Washington 2-1. So there is that. They are being able to beat up those teams. But when we're starting to see over the past 3-4 weeks, ever since I had them at number 2 and I got a lot of heat for it, they have had what feels like a 30% win streak. So not doing super well. Number 10, one of the most active additionals at the trade deadline, just trying to build and get back into this division fight. The San Diego Padres, they've been kind of under the radar this season. I started them pretty high in April, and then I kind of dropped them down to middling because they've been pretty middling, and they kind of just floated around there for the past 2 months or so. But thanks to other teams somewhat struggling, them getting better at the trade deadline, them picking up wins, being a little more consistent, they've worked their way back up into, my opinion, a top 10 team. 3-0 over the weekend, or earlier in the week against the Mets, 2-1 against St. Louis over the weekend. So 5-1 week for the Padres after adding and getting stronger. I think this is an exciting team, and I will not be surprised if they are not in the top row in the next couple of weeks. Number 9. Another story this season for Boston has just been an up and down roller coaster, and it's been, Boston fans have got to be excited with where the team is sitting. I think they're only 3 games back now from a division lead over the Blue Jays. They passed the New York Yankees in the standings. They've been one of the hotter teams, especially over the past 3 weeks. I think we had, a 10-game win streak in there as well. Boston has just been able to deliver, and they did add a little bit of pitching depth at the trade deadline, which I think the bottom end of the rotation was their issue. We did know the top end of the rotation very strong. 3-0 against Houston, 2-1 against Minnesota, 5-1 week. Boston is trending in the right direction, and I think if it hadn't been for the struggles they had in May, early June, especially in their division against Toronto, for instance. They'd probably be division leaders at this point, and this is where we expected Boston to be coming in this season. We got to remember this team was set up well at the beginning of the season. A lot of people predicting them to be right there, so they're kind of just delivering now. Next up, Seattle Mariners bouncing back after I was disappointed. 1-2 against Athletics earlier in the week, going into a big important series against Texas, which they delivered on 3-1. But I wanted to see a back-to-back series win. Seattle is very capable of being a top row team on this board, and they just haven't been able to find that step. They're still a few games back of Houston at this point, and based on my trajectories, I do think that Seattle is going to slowly chip away at that. I think Seattle is the better team overall at this point in the season, and I think Seattle is trending to be able to be the division leader. At the same time, I think the National League does lend its hand to be a little bit stronger. There are a couple of teams that have demonstrated being able to beat Seattle, and that's number 7. Number 7 at this point, I do have the Toronto Blue Jays. Took a little bit of heat for having them at number 5 last week, and I was hesitant to move them up higher than that because I saw a week like this week being very possible, and a little bit of concern about the real reality of what we had been seeing going into last week. Toronto 1-3 against Baltimore, 1-2 against Kansas City. Sure, they maybe could have won today's game on the rubber match. Not going to hold too much against that. 4 games in 48 hours against a team like Baltimore Orioles, who always seem to just demolish the Blue Jays. Again, not going to hold a whole lot into it. It's their first real struggle of a week that we've seen in a long time for this Toronto team. It's going to be interesting how they bounce back. They really were buyers at this trade deadline, bringing in 2 big arms into their bullpen, adding Shane Bieber at the trade deadline, whether he can come in here and impact. The Jays were really lacking that first game 1 starter ace, and Bieber is very much capable of that. At the same time, I just want to go back to this. Like, Seattle, I think, might be better than Toronto. Toronto obviously holds the tiebreaker at this point. Did win 4 out of the 6 games against Seattle. I think they do match up very well, and at this point, Toronto has a little bit of a lead in the division. They have that little things working in their advantage as well. But Toronto, I think they're on the edge here. If we see another week, they're going to have a tough week coming in this week. They got Dodgers, and then after visiting Colorado. So I want to see a winning week. You're going to Colorado, should win that series, pick up a win in LA. It should at least be 500 if you're going to maintain this, but they got some hungry teams right behind the Jays. Number 6. This one was hard. Mets showing signs to me of what we've seen over the past little bit of struggling and not being able to stop the bleeding. It's very possible that we could see a Mets implosion here. I'm going to one more week here to kind of sort it out. 0-3 against the Padres, 1-2 against the Giants, and just not a great week, not performing super well. They did make some additions. Might take a little bit to figure out, and I still think they are on that way to the playoffs team. I do think on the edge of it, the National League does have a little bit of an edge over a lot of these teams as well. So that's kind of what you're going to see a lot of. You got 5 out of the top 6 teams being National League, and this brings us to the last American League team. Detroit, bouncing back after what was like a 15-game stretch of just struggling. 3-0 against Arizona, 1-1 against Philadelphia, and they're playing the Sunday nighter tonight, and it's probably already kicked off. But Detroit is one of those teams that has grown such a big lead. The division is not really in jeopardy. I think it's pretty clear at this point that Detroit is going to get a first-round bye. Those all things adding up to being a top team in the American League. The offense, we started seeing it come around a little bit, especially against Arizona this week. On top of that, we saw Skubal pitch a pretty big gem against the Phillies yesterday, I believe. So Skubal is just going to deliver this team, avoid them from going on long losing streaks. We did see that struggle. I want to be able to actually build on this. I did drop them down from the top team in the American League last week, but I think they've regained that from me, while be it only at number 5. At number 4, I have the LA Dodgers bouncing back after a little bit of a tough stretch, and it's looking like they might start getting into form, especially now that they're getting some of their pitching back. We saw Snell coming back. Ohtani starting to get some pitching going. And the rotation is starting to take shape as a solid 5 that we thought it was going to be coming into the season. Could be only a matter of time before we see the Dodgers back up here. 2-1 against Cincinnati, 2-1 against Tampa, 4-2 week. Not against like any groundbreaking teams, but they're on the road. They're winning on the road, and we're seeing signs of that pitching after shutting out Tampa Bay twice this weekend. Number 3. I'm hesitant. I'm always hesitant when I'm talking about Philadelphia because I always feel like maybe I'm overestimating them at times. 1-2 against the White Sox, 1-1 against Detroit. It's not like exactly like they went out and had a week that really supports me keeping them in this spot. But at the same time, I feel like 4 through 7 still all kind of in the same boat. Not like amazing weeks to really that. So I'm going to keep Philadelphia in the same spot this week. Mind you, there are some interesting matchups coming up with them. And whether or not we can see that playoff caliber team that we know they are capable of, it's the one thing they have that. I have the expectation. It just seems like sometimes they don't live up to it. When I start moving them down, they start doing it. So it's just like, okay, I'm gonna give them number 3 for one more week and kind of sort it out. And that brings us to number 2. Chicago Cubs 1-2 against Milwaukee, 2-1 against Baltimore. Not exactly a blow it off the seats week, but they've been in this position now for the second straight week. They've been in this top row for at least 2.5 months. They've been up here. So like Chicago has pretty much cemented themselves in this top row, I think. They're very much capable. They did some additions at the trade deadline to try and round out this roster and make themselves competitive coming for the final stretch here. And at number 1, I do have Milwaukee. I'm just throwing it up here now because these two teams did meet up in the first series of the week. Milwaukee did win the first 2 games. Chicago avoided the sweep and the third one. And I think that's the difference maker right now. And then we see Milwaukee over the weekend just absolutely smash Washington. They're missing Jackson Chourio over the whole thing. So it's like Milwaukee is like just figured it out. It's like they were down here. I remember back in April, May, they were down here. And we thought this team, all right, they're done. They finally got caught up being a small market team. Things caught up with them. But then they just poured it on. And they sweep the Dodgers. And they beat the Cubs, and they're just a team that through and through feels like an all-around, well-rounded team. In the lineup's well-rounded, the pitching's well-rounded, the bullpen's well-rounded. Right now, they, in my opinion, are the team to beat. They are hot, but rightfully so. And there you guys have it. 1 through 30. Let me know what you guys think. Subscribe, like, comment, all that fun stuff, guys, and we will see you out there for that next video.